A new executive order on deep-sea mining, a pullback in the gold price, but is it? U.S. playing both sides, Russia, Ukraine. U.S. playing both sides, DRC, Rwanda. Much to look forward to this episode. Hello and welcome to the Northern Miner Podcast. My name's Adrian Pocobelli. And I haven't even discussed the massive drawdown in copper inventories in Shanghai, the most since 2003. So lots to look forward to this episode. We have an interview with Northern Miner Western editor Henry Lazenby. I'm calling it Anatomy of a Site Visit. We go step by step through Henry's journey from Vancouver to Fortuna Mining's Lindero mine in Argentina, a very remote location, and I thought this would provide an interesting window. It's one perspective into the reality of the mining business. Little details where you have a constant small headache because of a lack of oxygen. For instance, where do you land? Who's with you? You'll hear about the social media influencers that joined Henry on his journey. So a very entertaining and interesting, as usual, interview with Henry Lazenby. And also coming up, we have a spotlight with Michael Zolotov, Chief Technology Officer of Razor Labs, who discusses how AI is benefiting mining operations. So an interesting discussion there. So turning to the news of the moment, it is all front page today, my friends. So let's begin, shall we, with this executive order on deep-sea mining. This is Reuters via mining.com. Trump signs executive order boosting deep-sea mining industry. President Donald Trump on Thursday signed an executive order aimed at boosting the deep-sea mining industry, marking his latest attempt to boost U.S. access to nickel, copper, and other critical minerals used widely across the economy. The order, which Trump signed in private, seeks to jumpstart the mining of both U.S. and international waters as part of a push to offset China's sweeping control of the critical minerals industry. Reuters first reported last month that the order was under deliberation. Parts of the Pacific Ocean and elsewhere are estimated to contain large amounts of potato-shaped rocks known as polymetallic nodules, filled with the building blocks for electric vehicles and electronics. It's very difficult to not take a step back here and just see a slight irony that here we are vacuuming up the seafloor, as we saw in the 60 Minutes video from a year ago, showing these machines at work, and they basically vacuum up the top layer of the seafloor and sift out all of these nodules and then leave a massive plume behind it. And this is all being done in the name of electric vehicles. And why do we need electric vehicles? Nominally, to save the environment. And it brings up a deeper issue, I would argue, which is if people are making an argument for, let's call it green energy products, let's call it a wind turbine, let's call it a solar panel, let's call it an electric vehicle, to name just a few popular examples, I would argue the credibility of that argument to build that product, if it doesn't include the entire supply chain, and it's just looking at the final product, then it's not a credible argument. In order to have a credible argument for green energy products, one must incorporate the entire supply chain. It's very important to factor that into our final analysis. And once that is incorporated, then we can start to make, I would argue, informed decision. So let's continue. Here's a quote from the executive order. Quote, "The United States has a core national security and economic interest in maintaining leadership in deep-sea science and technology and seabed mineral resources." End quote. The order directs the administration to expedite mining permits under the Deep Seabed Hard Minerals Resource Act of 1980 and to establish a process for issuing permits along the U.S. Outer Continental Shelf. It also orders the expedited review of seabed mining permits, quote, "in areas beyond the national jurisdiction," end quote, a move likely to spark friction within the international community. Quote, "in areas beyond the national jurisdiction," end quote. The International Seabed Authority, created by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which the U.S. has not ratified, has for years been considering standards for deep-sea mining in international waters, although it has yet to formalize them due to unresolved differences over acceptable levels of dust, noise, and other factors from the practice. Supporters of deep-sea mining say it would lessen the need for large mining operations on land, which are often unpopular with host communities. Environmental groups are calling for all activities to be banned, warning that industrial operations on the ocean floor could cause irreversible biodiversity loss. Now, China has replied, and this is a story from the BBC. Trump deep-sea mining order violates law, China says. This is by Esme Stallard at bbc.com. Donald Trump has signed a controversial executive order aimed at stepping up deep-sea mining within U.S. and in international waters. The move to allow exploration outside its national waters has been met by condemnation from China, which said it violates international law. Thursday's order is the latest issued by the U.S. president to try to increase America's access to minerals used by aerospace, green technology, and healthcare sectors. It continues, the latest U.S. executive order was issued to, quote, establish the United States as a global leader in responsible seabed mineral exploration, end quote, it reads. The move appears to bypass a long-running round of UN negotiations on mining in international waters. Many countries, including China, have delayed issuing permits until countries agreed on a framework for how resources could be shared. Quote, the U.S. authorization violates international law and harms the overall interests of the international community, end quote, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiakun said on Friday. China dominates global production of rare earths and critical metals like cobalt and lithium. Trump has been frustrated by this relative weakness of the U.S. position, analysts say. Quote, we want the U.S. to get ahead of China in this resource space under the ocean, on the ocean bottom, end quote, a U.S. official said on Thursday. To achieve this, the order says the U.S. will speed up the process of issuing exploration licenses and recovery permits both in its own waters and in, quote, areas beyond national jurisdiction, end quote. So this could create a diplomatic tsunami that goes way beyond mining. And we have a response from Jeff Waters of Ocean Conservancy, a U.S.-based environmental group. Quote, deep-sea mining is a deeply dangerous endeavor for our ocean. The harm caused by deep-sea mining isn't restricted to the ocean floor. It will impact the entire water column, top to bottom, and everyone and everything relying on it, end quote, he added in a statement released on Friday. It is not clear how quickly deep-sea mining could begin, but one mining company, the Metals Company, or TMC, is already in discussions with the U.S. government to obtain permits. TMC's CEO Gerard Barron has previously said he hopes to begin mining by the end of the year. Now, as I've mentioned here before, I interviewed Gerard Barron about 3 years ago. And I mean, it sounded very innocuous the way deep sea mining would work, this idea of just kind of picking up these nodules off the bottom of the ocean and nothing is destroyed. But when I saw the 60 Minutes video a year ago, as I've mentioned before, it looks like a massive industrial grade vacuum cleaner. And when I saw that, I had a completely different view on deep sea mining. And again, this is all being done in the name of the environment, even according to Gerard Barron in that interview. It continues, along with others in the mining industry, he disputes the environmental claims made and has argued that the abyssal zone, 3,000 to 6,000 meters below sea level, has very low concentrations of life. So interestingly, he's not denying the destruction. He's just saying there's not much life around there that will be impacted. Quote, here there's zero flora, and if we measure the amount of fauna, or animal life, in the forms of biomass, there's around 10 grams per square meter. That compares with more than 30 kilograms of biomass where the world is pushing more nickel extraction, which is our equatorial rainforests, end quote, he previously told BBC. Finally, a recent paper published by the Natural History Museum and the National Oceanography Center looked at the long-term impacts of deep-sea mining from a test carried out in the 1970s. It concluded that some sediment-dwelling creatures were able to recolonize the site and recover from the test, but larger animals appear not to have returned. The scientists concluded this could have been because there were no more nodules for them to live on. The polymetallic nodules where the minerals are found take millions of years to form, and therefore cannot easily be replaced. So the hunt for critical minerals continues. As we see in this next story, U.S. greenlights rare earth mine next to Mountain Pass in California. And this is by a staff writer at mining.com. The U.S. government is greenlighting the development of a historic mine in California next to its only rare earths operation, as part of President Donald Trump's recent executive order to bolster domestic production of critical minerals. On April 8th, the Department of Interior, or DOI, issued approval for Dateline Resources to continue its development of the Coliseum Rare Earths Project, situated within the Mojave National Preserve in San Bernardino County. Due to its location, the project has been stalled for years. According to the Australian miner, the department's communication reaffirms that the company's existing rights under the Mining Act and the California Desert Protection Act are now valid. And we have a quote from Dateline's managing director, Stephen Baghdadi, who said in a press release, quote, "The Department of the Interior's public support and confirmation of our rights provide a strong foundation for moving the Coliseum project forward." End quote. Scrolling down, upon completion of review, Dateline's team concluded that the project shares the same geological setting as Mountain Pass, which started production in 1952 and was a primary global source of rare earth elements from the 1960s to the 1990s. So interesting developments there. Continuing on the rare earths front, Lynas Rare Earths seeks U.S. aid for Texas refinery as costs surge. This is Reuters via mining.com. Australia's Lynas Rare Earths is in talks with the Trump administration to counter rising costs for the refinery it's building in Texas, while at the same time warning that the president's tariff agenda could threaten the project. While pre-construction activities are underway, additional expenses are needed to mitigate wastewater challenges, Lynas said in a statement Monday. The company, backed by Australia's richest person, Gina Rinehart, is in discussions with the U.S. government about the issue, it added. Perth-based Lynas is the largest supplier outside China of rare earths used in everything from smartphones to defense applications. The Asian nation's dominance of the industry has caused angst in the U.S., which is seeking to bolster alternative supply chains. In response to punitive tariffs imposed by Washington, Beijing has added 7 rare earths to its export control list. Quote, "We are also reviewing the potential cost implications for the U.S. project as a consequence of recent announcements on global tariffs," end quote, Lynas said. Lynas produces so-called light rare earths, which are used in magnets for electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, and munitions. It's set to enter the heavy industry with new refining capacity both in the U.S. and in Malaysia, where it has an existing site that from later this year will start processing many of the metals restricted by Chinese export controls. Lynas currently sources ore for its refineries from its Mount Weld mine near Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, according to its website. Continuing on, China asks Korea not to export products using rare earths to U.S. defense firms. According to reports, this is Reuters via mining.com. Beijing recently asked South Korean companies not to export products containing China's rare earth minerals to U.S. defense firms, the Korea Economic Daily reported on Tuesday, citing government and company sources. The report said China's Commerce Ministry delivered the message in letters to Korean companies which make power transformers, batteries, displays, electric vehicles, aerospace, and medical equipment, all of which use the key materials. The letters said Korean companies could face sanctions if they violate the export restrictions, the report said. South Korea's industry ministry was not immediately available for comment. Continuing on, there is a new report on rare earth mining. We may have touched on this last week, but it's a good reminder here. There's just a little bit I want to highlight from this article in boel.de, Fractured Authority and Resource Politics in Myanmar. New report on rare earth mining. And I believe we heard about this report, but there's a good summary here of how much China relies on Myanmar, which doesn't really get enough attention. And here is an excerpt from the article. Globally, the large majority of these permanent magnets are manufactured in China, which dominate the market with the world's largest processing and production facilities supplying up to 90% of global demand. While some of the raw materials are mined domestically in China, a significant portion is imported, often unknown to purchasing companies and end users, from a country lesser known on the global stage, Myanmar. In 2023, around 60% of the global supply of 2 of these heavy rare earth elements, dysprosium and terbium, originated from Myanmar. So around 60% of the dysprosium and terbium that finds itself in China originates in Myanmar. In fact, Myanmar's total mining output of these 2 elements doubled that of China's own mines. So you see how important Myanmar is to the equation, particularly for dysprosium and terbium, which we're learning are rare earths of particular importance. The mines in civil war-torn Myanmar are located in its northernmost state, Kachin, along the 2 kilometers long border Myanmar shares with China. Until recently, the mines were controlled by militias aligned with the military junta that overthrew Myanmar's elected government in February 2021. However, since late 2024, control has shifted. The long-standing resistance group Kachin Independence Organization Army captured the mines and controls the excavation and trade of these critical minerals now. So, just to highlight again the importance of Myanmar, and we have this article in the Financial Times this week, How Critical Minerals Became a Flashpoint in U.S.-China Trade War. I just wanted to highlight another aspect of China's role in metals processing and the supply chains. Here's an excerpt from the FT. The U.S. Geological Survey said in March that China led production of 30 of 44 critical minerals from arsenic to tungsten. In an earlier study, it said the materials thought to have highest supply risk were gallium, vital for semiconductors and night vision goggles, cobalt, an aerospace and battery metal, and neodymium, a light rare earth used in permanent magnets. Sir Mick Davis, the former Xstrata chief who leads Vision Blue Resources, a critical minerals investor, told a conference in Washington this month that Beijing had a strategic and competitive edge because of its investments in processing within its own borders. Quote, the West, Europe, the U.S. have been asleep at the wheel watching this happen, end quote, he said. And he's not wrong. We've been watching it here at the Northern Miner for years. And it's only, I would say, since COVID that the light has really gone on in policymakers' minds. Otherwise, mining was not on the radar. There was no concern. Now it's become a global political issue, as we see in Australia, Canada, the United States, China, Russia, Ukraine, Congo, Rwanda, and the Sahel. It's become a global issue, as we all know. So, very interesting excerpt there. Continuing on, a report in the Financial Times on Cobalt, which is the mining group backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. They are expanding into the Democratic Republic of Congo in a big way. And this is Camilla Hodgson at the Financial Times. A mining startup backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos is expanding into the Democratic Republic of Congo in a bet that the resource-rich nation will be crucial to U.S. efforts to compete with China for minerals that are needed for the energy transition. Cobalt Metals, which deploys artificial intelligence to identify untapped mineral deposits, was betting, quote, big, end quote, on the Democratic Republic of Congo, said Benjamin Katabuka, its newly appointed Director General in the country. The company would recruit staff in the country and plan to apply for licenses to explore for lithium, copper, and cobalt, he said. The push into Congo comes as the African nation seeks to secure a minerals deal with the United States in talks that are part of President Donald Trump's ambitions to break dependency on China for metals. Quote, Cobalt is looking to go big in this country in terms of investment, end quote, said Katabuka, a former employee of Freeport-McMoRan, who has more than a decade of experience in the industry in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Quote, investments could be in the billions, end quote. So the Congo continues to be a major flashpoint here for the entire mining discussion in 2025. It seems to be where all roads lead. We have another story. Mine collapse in eastern Congo kills at least 10 people. This is Reuters via mining.com. At least 10 people were killed in a gold mine collapse in eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the rebel-appointed governor of South Kivu province said on Thursday. M23 rebels have seized East Congo's 2 biggest cities since January, in an escalation of a long-running conflict rooted in the spillover into Congo of Rwanda's 1994 genocide and the struggle for control of Congo's vast mineral resources. Congo's government and M23 pledged in a statement released on Wednesday, after talks in Qatar, to work towards peace, raising a glimmer of hope in the latest cycle of violence. Douglas Dunia Mazumbuko, the M23-appointed South Kivu governor, told Reuters on Thursday that the death toll at the Luhihi mine had reached 10, quote, and could rise given the number of injuries, end quote. He blamed the incident on, quote, uncontrolled construction and poor maintenance of gold wells, end quote, in the area. So a mine collapse in rebel-controlled territory. Then we got a very surprising headline on April 24th. Rwanda says it's in talks with the United States on possible minerals deal. So just like in Ukraine and Russia, we see the United States basically playing both sides. It looks like we're seeing the same thing here. with Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is Reuters via mining.com. Rwanda said on Wednesday it was in talks with the U.S. over a potential minerals deal, a development that follows similar ongoing talks between Washington and Rwanda's neighbor, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Responding to a Reuters question on whether Kigali and Washington were discussing a minerals access deal, a Rwanda government spokesperson said, quote, "Yes, this is part of the discussions that we're having with the United States," end quote. She declined to provide any further details. The U.S. is currently engaged in ongoing talks with Congo over a potential minerals for security deal. So a bit of a surprising development on that front. Another interesting headline, this is constructionreviewonline.com. Italy commits $270 million for Libido corridor. And what I find interesting about this headline is we saw recently how Giorgia Meloni just visited President Trump, and then we get this headline, a few days later. And what that tells me is they likely discuss the Libido corridor behind closed doors, but that ultimately it's not something that really came up in the press conference or that was really discussed publicly. And to me, this is an illustration of the reality of the situation, which is these minerals are top of mind for decision makers, for the top leaders of these countries, but that they seemingly don't want to make that a big deal in public, interestingly. And finally, Burkina Faso grants mining lease to Russia's Norgold. So this is interesting too. This is Reuters via mining.com. Burkina Faso has granted an industrial mining license to Russian miner Norgold for a gold project, the military-led West African government said, aiming to capitalize on record-high gold prices to strengthen an economy hit by insecurity. The move signals deepening economic ties between Russia and Burkina Faso as the junta that seized power in 2022 continues its pivot away from traditional Western allies towards Moscow. So interesting development there. So more stories to come in our news section. We're just getting started here. If you want to find us online, you can find us at northernminer.com. You can find us on X at Northern Miner. You can find us on Instagram at The Northern Miner and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where we also host these podcasts and wherever podcasts are available, including Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, let's turn to Michael Zolotov, co-founder and CTO of Razor Labs, for this week's Spotlight. Joining us today, I'm very pleased to welcome to the Northern Miner podcast for the very first time for this week's Spotlight, Michael Zolotov, co-founder and CTO of Razor Labs. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adrian. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you, Michael. One of the most interesting parts of the mining sector as a news narrative is technology. And it seems like technology could really change things in the coming few years. It's already begun. So Razor Labs is a leading mining technology provider. For those that are unfamiliar with Razor Labs, could you give us a little bit of background about the company?
Sure. Our focus is delivering predictive maintenance and condition monitoring via what we call AI sensor fusion, both for fixed and mobile equipment. We work with some of the largest players like Glencore, Siemens, and others. And basically, we are like automated doctors for mining equipment.
Very interesting. So automated doctors for mining equipment. Do you repair equipment? Just to clarify, what exactly does that mean?
So no, we don't repair it. Obviously, the teams on site do it. But imagine just like if something is wrong with you and you go to a doctor and the doctor has, MRI and CT and blood work and everything. We basically do the same for machines. We monitor them with a very diverse set of sensors, really from cameras to vibration to pressures and oil and everything. And we use artificial intelligence to combine everything to give a very deep diagnosis of what's wrong with the equipment. Again, whether it's a haul truck or an excavator or a mill or a crusher, really weeks and sometimes even months before it fails, and therefore preventing equipment failures. That's what we do.
Okay, excellent. So it sounds like a systematic approach. Is this then the AI sensor fusion technology? In a sense, why should mining companies use this technology?
The value that we deliver is eventually, if you're mine constrained, for example, and you're a processing plant, you care about cutting your maintenance costs, you care about reducing spare parts and labor and so on. And when you actually prevent a failure from happening, it would normally cost you between 3 to 5 times less than when the breakdown completely happens. And whether if you're plant constrained, we're looking at increasing the throughput and the productivity of the sites. So it's literally pushing more tons by both reducing the unplanned downtime and also the planned one, because you do not need to maintain the equipment if it's healthy.
So, what is a concrete example, say, of how this might work on a mine site?
Sure. So, for example, right now the gold prices are skyrocketing, and all gold sites that we know are really trying to push as much tons in recovery as possible. And the mills on these sites are always a bottleneck. They're always working, or they should be working 24/7, and there's no redundancy. And just a few months ago, we had a major failure that we prevented on one of the sites that traditional methods just missed. They had their own vibration team, but the vibration team was obviously looking only at vibration, and nothing could be seen there. And actually, our system that looks both at vibration, but also at the motor current and the tachometers, and even at the feed to the mill by looking at the cameras, were able to pick up a critical deterioration of one of the bearings of the motor that just went unnoticed. And they actually had a very long shot. They forgot to rotate the mill during that shot. As you know, you need to rotate it slowly to prevent exactly this kind of failures. They just forgot to do it. And our system, when they went back online, indicated this very serious issue. And instead of having it breaking down in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks, they just reshuffled the tasks in the next shot that they had a week after. And in a completely planned manner, took a few hours, replaced the motor. They took apart the old motor and they just saw this severe damage that would have caused at least a few days of shutdown. So that incident alone was more than $500,000. And that's one failure in one site. I mean, multiply it across, multiple failures across multiple sites. And really the potential is enormous.
Interesting. And ultimately, this is an AI technology. Like, ultimately, that is what solved this issue. Is that correct?
Correct. The diagnosis that was performed by the AI by using the sensors that we deployed, all of this system together was able to deliver this value. It's worth noting that we are using existing sensors wherever they exist on site, but if there is any gaps, any sensors that are missing, our teams just come to site and deploy the missing sensors.
Okay, excellent. So a lot of people in the industry are using AI. It seems like there's a lot of different applications that AI can be used for. So how is Razor Labs different in how it's incorporating AI into a mine site?
Sure. So it's a very good question. And as you know, traditional AI basically learns by example. It means that you need to actually deliver it hundreds of thousands of examples of what you want it to learn, in our case, failures. And if I take this even mill example, I don't think that in the history of humankind, there's been hundreds of thousands of mill failures in all mine sites combined. And for that reason, when you actually look at old-fashioned traditional AIs, the vendors actually ask the sites to train and to calibrate the system that they deploy for half a year or even 18 months. And it puts, this crazy burden on these teams on site that are already overloaded. And I guess that one of our key differentiations is that our AI comes pre-trained with all the required diagnosis knowledge. So it means that the teams on site don't need to train it, they don't need to teach it. We actually use the same training methods that ChatGPT uses. So when you use ChatGPT, you don't need to train it or teach it, you just use it. And obviously it's a huge advantage because you remove this entire requirement for, long on-site training phases. So it's a very different training mechanism that we use for our AI to be able to deliver value literally the way that we walk out of the site.
Okay, excellent. So you also use visual AI technology. What role does that play within your methodology?
So yeah, that's correct. When you think about it, cameras are maybe the only way to actually monitor the material itself. And many times the material is actually the one that is causing the failures. We see in many clients that have, either uncalibrated crusher gaps or worn liners that are causing oversized material that is then downstream causing stoppages to the equipment. But the equipment is actually not to blame. And actually the material is the one that's causing it. And when we put cameras really on strategic places like, the feed to the mill, like the discharge of the crusher, it allows us to monitor the material itself. And we actually cross-reference it with the rest of the sensors, with the oil sensors and the vibration and so on. And it allows us to really make sure that we completely cover all the failures. We also use it to monitor the conveyors themselves, like misalignment and rips and so on. And in, gold and copper sites, where it's highly beneficial, we're also monitoring flotation cells. So we're looking at the bubbles, their velocity and density with AI. And the AI actually analyzes these parameters, the sizes of the bubbles, their density, and so on, to make sure that the gold recovery or copper or coal recovery are really optimal. So that's something that can only be done with a camera and cannot be done with any other way.
Very interesting. And so, what machines are involved in all of this? And how do you make this work, say, in harsh environments, say, if you're up north or something?
Sure. So we actually cover all fixed assets on site from, the crushing circuit to the grinding circuit and conveyors and critical pumping systems and compressors and everything. And we also cover haul trucks, also now expanding to excavators. One of the key features of the sensor fusion is that we're able to monitor the equipment under the same operational conditions and under the same load. And this is critical because obviously if the machine is working harder, it will vibrate more strongly. All the data would be completely different. And regular traditional, systems that disregard it just give you these thousands of false alarms that you see in SCADA or other systems. But our system is able to monitor, for example, a haul truck, always at the same gear, same load, same speed, same everything, which completely prevents all these false alarms. So it's both the fixed assets on site, but also the mobile fleet itself. When we look at how we implement regarding your second question, so we have really a very clear methodology. We come to site for a site survey where we really work with the client to identify what are the single lines of failure that if one machine stops, then the entire line stops, that have the highest impact. We discuss the KPIs with the client and we help them build the business case, whether it's reduction of maintenance costs, of spare parts and labor, as I said, or whether it's increase of throughput, depending on the site and its characteristics. And we really map what sensors exist and where there are gaps. And then we send our local teams and we have them really both in America, in Australia, in Africa, really in every major territory. We have local teams that deploy exactly the sensors that are required. And we have a methodology of which sensor is required and where. And that's basically it. I mean, once the sensors are deployed, the system is up and running. As I said, there is no teaching. The client does not need to teach or calibrate the system, and it basically runs from that point onward.
And as we start to wrap up here, Michael, a lot of mine sites may already have monitoring tools of a certain kind. In a sense, why should they be interested in what Razor Labs is offering? In a sense, how are you different from what other people might have?
Sure. So I think that there are many dashboards that provide you with, the raw data that you need to analyze by yourself and that you need to continuously look at by yourself, which is obviously not practical. And our approach is different. We do not just throw terabytes of raw data at our clients, but we really provide, as I said in the beginning, kind of a 24/7 automated doctor or, a team of doctors that are looking at your machines. And this is what the AI does. They're giving you a very deep diagnosis, whether it's gear mesh that I found here or bearing deterioration there or, performance issues. And it doesn't tell you that something is wrong and, providing you with these thousands of false alarms, but it's really telling you what's failing, what is the failure root cause, and what needs to be done. You can say it's kind of an Apple approach with giving you the bottom line and the recommendation. Obviously, you can see all the data, but the diagnosis part is really the key differentiator. And in order to be able to deliver it, we also use sensors that others don't, like cameras that we spoke about and like oil sensors that really allow us to cover failure modes that other systems cannot. So by putting all of these sensors together, we can really make sure that there are no failures in the machines that we cover.
Okay, excellent. And finally, who should consider this technology and where should they go in order to get more information on it?
I think that site leaders and maintenance managers and innovation managers that can see in their KPIs that unplanned downtime of equipment is causing them large losses. Again, whether it's in maintenance costs or just lost productivity, or other sites that are over maintaining, right? We've seen sites that are stopping the site every week for maintenance. So they're losing lots of throughput because of that planned maintenance. Any leader of a site that can see how they can benefit are really welcome to contact us. Just go to our website, razor-labs.com. Send us a message through the site.
Michael Zolotov, co-founder and CTO of Razor Labs, thank you for joining us and sharing everything you're working on at the company.
Thank you very much, Adrian. It was a pleasure to be here.
And thank you once again to Razor Labs for sponsoring this week's episode of the Northern Miner Podcast. Turning to the website. This big copper story, again, flying under the radar, which are the stories we love here. Chinese copper inventories post record weekly drop. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Copper inventories in China saw a record weekly drop and a sign that demand in the top consumer is holding up well, even as anxiety about a burgeoning trade war swirls. Inventories in warehouses monitored by the Shanghai Futures Exchange shrank by 55,000 tons, the most in data going back to 2003 to 116,750 tons, according to weekly figures released on Friday. So just to repeat that, the inventory shrunk by 55,000 tons, and they're now at 117,000 tons. So a significant drawdown there. A little more than a third of the copper inventories were taken for delivery. The sharp drawdown adds to evidence that China's physical copper market is tightening up, with buyers also paying more to import cargoes and spot prices trading at steep premiums. Shanghai tracked inventories more than halved in the past month amid an opportunistic buying spree that followed a pullback in prices. Quote, demand from fabricators has been very good, Wenqi Xu, an analyst with COFCO Futures, said by phone. Quote, there is no impact seen from the tariffs yet, end quote. The global copper market has been rocked this year by an evolving trade war which may see Washington place tariffs on copper imports as well as China's efforts to sustain growth. On Friday, China vowed to, quote, fully prepare, end quote, emergency plans to ward against increasing external shocks, taking a patient approach in defending growth as deepening tensions with the Trump administration in the U.S. pile pressure on the world's number 2 economy. Copper prices have snapped back strongly from an initial sell-off as President Donald Trump rolled out tariffs on China and other nations. London Metal Exchange contracts are up more than 15% from lows seen in early April. Another story, this is Bloomberg. Copper demand in leading market China has proved remarkably resilient this year despite headwinds from the U.S.-led trade war and the nation's property crisis, with buyers taking advantage of price slumps to snap up supplies and market metrics pointing to still solid conditions. Quote, the copper market remains in a tight balance despite macroeconomic difficulties, end quote, said Zhao Guangjun, Vice General Manager of Trade Business at Jiangxi Copper Company, a top smelter, told an industry conference this week. After prices fell recently, quote, spot orders from fabricators exploded, end quote, Zhao said. The global copper market, along with other leading industrial commodities, has been in turmoil in the opening months of 2025, with prices plunging briefly towards $8,000 a ton earlier in April. The picture for the metals used in pipes, wiring, and batteries is especially complicated, as while broad trade tariffs may crimp growth and hurt consumption, the Trump administration has also mooted a levy on imports, draining supplies from elsewhere and aiding U.S. prices. At the same time, there's speculation that Beijing may ramp up stimulus to support the world's second-largest economy and counter the more challenging overseas conditions as U.S. President Donald Trump imposes punishing tariffs while also holding out the promise of talks and a deal. And scrolling down, we have a quote, demand in spot market from surveys of downstream users or apparent consumption are all very good. End quote. Angela B., head of Asian Metals and Mineral Research at Mercuria Energy Group, said at the conference held by Shanghai Metals Markets in Nanchang, Jiangxi. Indicators, quote, are too good to be true, end quote, be added. So the copper market looking quite healthy, isn't it? Now, continuing on, we got this very interesting development on a theme we've been following for years, the theme of green metals. And here is the article. This is Reuters via mining.com. LME explores producing price premia for sustainable metal. So it is finally happening. The LME put out a press release, and a few stories have been written on it. The LME is exploring the potential for producing premiums that will reflect the sustainability of brands that can be deliverable against its metal contracts, it said on Wednesday. Energy-intensive metal production can have a major impact on the environment because of the carbon and other pollutants that are emitted. Some end consumers are willing to pay a premium for sustainable practices that cut emissions. Quote, by making a sustainability price differential public, the value attached to sustainable metals will be transparent and could support the development of the market for sustainable metals, end quote, the exchange said in a release. Quote, the LME is discussing its proposal, with a range of physical market stakeholders and will provide further progress updates in due course, end quote. The LME, the world's largest and oldest forum for trading metals, partnered with digital platform Metals Hub for an initiative launched last year to develop a price discovery mechanism for low-carbon nickel. It is now planning to launch a broader series of sustainable metal premia for the aluminum, copper, nickel, and zinc traded on its platform, underpinned by a robust assessment process. Quote, "We welcome the LME's proposal as a much-needed move to enable the proper pricing of low-carbon sustainable products," end quote, said Nick Stansbury, head of climate solutions asset management at financial services company L&G. Quote, "We believe transparent pricing of sustainable materials is critical to incentivizing investment into transition technologies in the mining industry," end quote. Very interesting there, and just a headline, U.S. green steel startup raises $129 million amid Trump tariff uncertainty. That's a headline from Bloomberg News via mining.com. And just a line, Colorado-based Electra has raised $129 million in a new funding round to continue developing technology that can produce iron needed for steel at temperatures below boiling water and without planet-warming emissions. The startup, which came out of stealth in 2022, has raised a total of $214 million from investors, including Bill Gates-led Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Singapore-based Temasek Holdings, and Capricorn Investment Group. Another headline, U.S. eyes post-war joint business with Russia in energy and metals. And this is Bloomberg News via mining.com. And according to people familiar with the planning, joint projects in the Arctic, as well as oil and gas and rare earth minerals, are among the options being considered under a partnership the U.S. would offer as part of a peace pact, the people said, asking not to be identified discussing matters that aren't public. Russia, encouraged by President Donald Trump's talk of economic deals that could follow a peace agreement, is drawing up a list of projects and assets that officials hope might interest the U.S., according to people in Moscow involved in the effort. And then, similar to what we're seeing in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, we see the other side. This is Reuters via mining.com. Trump says Ukraine has not signed minerals deal. U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday said Ukraine has not signed a deal on rare earth minerals, and he hopes it will be signed immediately. Quote, "Ukraine, headed by Volodymyr Zelensky, has not signed the final papers on the very important rare earth deal with the United States. It is at least 3 weeks late. Hopefully it will be signed immediately. Working on the overall peace deal between Russia and Ukraine is going smoothly," end quote, he said in a Truth Social post. Continuing on, Australian Prime Minister pledges to set up critical minerals strategic reserve. This is Reuters via mining.com. So interesting headline there. And finally, Victoria Gold back in the news, and this is by Blair McBride, who covered that story so brilliantly last summer. Victoria Gold receiver faces potential contempt threat by Yukon government. The Yukon government could hold PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, the receiver of Victoria Gold and its former disaster-stricken Eagle mine, in contempt if its representatives don't appear to answer questions. The irony of this is gigantic. I mean, the whole reason PwC was brought in was because of the poor communications by Victoria Gold, I would argue. In a tense exchange of letters this week, Yukon Legislative Assembly Speaker Jeremy Harper urged that PwC's senior vice president and another representative attend a committee on the whole meeting to provide witness testimony. During an assembly debate on Friday, a contempt motion was put forward, the Canadian press reported. That followed the company's legal counsel saying in a reply that the government lacks the authority to compel its attendance to the meeting. So, I mean, it just raises a lot of questions. I mean, what is going on over there? Why is PwC's lawyer saying that the government lacks the authority? I mean, it's getting contentious. In response, the government's claim that Senior Vice President Michelle Grant could be sanctioned if she doesn't attend, counsel Peter Ruby with Goodman's LLP said isn't a threat that PwC must take seriously. Well, you might not need to take it seriously from a legal perspective, potentially, but I would think from a diplomatic perspective, you would want to take it seriously. I mean, this is kind of mind-bending. Quote, "We ask that you please provide the compelling authority on which you rely so that it may be properly considered," end quote, Ruby wrote. I mean, do they realize they're talking to the government? What is going on here? And scrolling down, the Northern Miner has requested comment from Harper's and Goodman's. So great reporting from Blair McBride at the Northern Miner, as we have come to expect. Those are your news stories. Now, let's take a look at metal prices. And turning to metal prices, let's take a quick look at the bond market. For context, the U.S. 10-year bond is yielding 4.23%. That is down 0.19% from last week, so big drop in yields for the U.S. 10-year bond. The UK 10-year gilt is yielding 4.5%. That is down 0.09% on the week. The Italy 10-year bond is yielding 3.62%. That is down 0.05% from last week. The German 10-year Bund is yielding 2.5%. That is up 0.03% on the week. And the Japanese 10-year bond is yielding 1.32%, edging just 0.01% higher on the week. So big drop in U.S. yields overall. Turning to precious metals, gold is trading at $3,326. That is down $254 on the week. So a bit of a drop in gold. It sounds like a lot, but in percentage terms, I mean, we're talking about maybe 6 or 7%. Silver is trading at $33.03 per ounce. That is 23 cents higher on the week. So silver edging higher. Platinum is trading at $985.40 per ounce. That is $30 higher on the week. And palladium is also higher at $941.50 per ounce. That is $26 higher on the week. So gold taking a breather while the rest of the precious metals move higher. Turning to industrial metals, copper is trading at $4.83 per pound. That is 13 cents higher on the week. And you just think of those stories out of China and the demand, and it's quite interesting as we hover near the $5 level. Iron ore is trading at $99.92 per metric ton. That is down 13 cents on the week and back below $100 a metric ton. Aluminum is trading at $1.11 per pound. That is 3 cents higher on the week. Lead also edges higher at 90 cents per pound. That is also 3 cents higher on the week. Nickel edges lower at $7.11 per pound. That is 3 cents lower on the week. And tin is trading at $14.51 per pound. That is 61 cents higher than last week. Cobalt is unchanged at $15.29 per pound. Lithium continues to fall at $9.43 per kilogram. That is 29 cents lower than last week. I mean, $9.43 on lithium. Amazing. It just recollects, Rick Rule was getting interested in lithium in December when I talked to him at the Northern Miner Conference there in London. Uranium is trading at $66.70 per pound. That is $1.65 higher than last week. And zinc edges higher at $1.20 per pound. That is 2 cents higher on the week. Zooming out, industrial metals edge sideways with copper showing a bit of life. And precious metals, other than gold, edging higher with gold taking a breather. And those are your metal prices. Coming up, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show Henry Lazenby, Western editor at the Northern Miner. We discuss Fortuna Mining's Lindero mine in Argentina and all of the different aspects of flying to this remote region from Vancouver for Henry and his experience there. It's really a fascinating discussion, a firsthand account on the reality of the mining business. I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you on the other side. Joining us today, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the Northern Miner podcast, Henry Lazenby, Western editor at the Northern Miner. Henry, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks very much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you, Henry, and what an interesting visit you recently had. You went to Argentina to visit Fortuna Mining's Lindero mine. Tell us, how did this come about as far as the site visit? Do they reach out to you? Did you see what was going on over there and said, hey, can I stop by? How did it work?
This was one of the fruits of my labors during the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada's annual convention in Toronto during early March, where you just get to network with a lot of mining folks. And this was one of the outflows from that, really, just talking to companies, talking to the executives, finding out what's new, what's happening with their portfolio, what are some of the key things to look out for. And that's the way you get invited on these analyst tours. And so companies in general are keen to show off their assets and to get storytellers out to site to help them essentially with the sales pitch, in a macro way.
Was this your first time in Argentina?
Well, I've been to South America several times, but yes, this was first time to Argentina, and what a trip it was. I'm normally based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, hence the title Western Editor. So going far south is a little bit off our beaten track, but of course, anything connected to international mining and of course, being done by a Canadian miner is fair game. It was quite the trip going down. I counted by my rough estimates, it's about 11 flights in total there and back again to get from Vancouver, LAX, Lima, Peru, Salta, Argentina, into the high Andes, and then back to Salta and Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Toronto, and Vancouver. It's like a circle tour of the South Americas. It was wonderful.
It's unbelievable that it is that complicated, Henry, to get from Vancouver. I would think there was a direct, but I guess not, from Vancouver to Buenos Aires.
Yeah, it appears as if some of the more internal routes in South America are still impacted by COVID cuts, and some of these routes are still operating on less frequent availability, including the one overnight flight between Lima and Salta, which was only available twice a week and is a red-eye flight. And so you have to kind of maneuver your itinerary to really make it work. But otherwise, it's all smooth sailing, really no big issues. And as soon as people hear you're there for mining, the light bulb goes on and they really don't give you much hassle.
Interesting. And just finally on the journey there, did you meet up with other reporters or was it just you?
Yes, there were about 2 other analysts and I would say about 2 other media outlets of various stripes. Some of them would be more accurately described as social media influencers, I guess. Then there was one other mining publication as well. But I can without a doubt say Northern Miner is by far carrying the most clout in those circles.
So interesting. The mining industry is not immune to the influencers. So you flew into which city? And tell us about kind of landing in Argentina and going to the Lindero mine.
Absolutely. All right. So we came into Salta, which is in Salta province. It's one of the northeastern provinces of Argentina. It's an emerging jurisdiction for mining. There are in the high Andes, and Salta is in the foothills of the Andes. And then about 40 minutes flight by direct flight as the chartered Beechcraft flew, you arrive in the Salar de Arizaro, which is one of these salars or salt flats in the high Andes. And it's smack in the middle of the lithium triangle of Bolivia, Argentina, Chile. So it's there in that extremely arid and highly evaporative environment. It literally was one of the driest environments I've ever set foot in myself. Honestly, I've never seen something quite like it. There are no shrubage, there are no plant growth. And then when you really look carefully and you do find some shrubage, they are extremely well adapted to living there. They're sparsely spaced, and you can see that they are just clinging on for bare life there. We did see one fox as well, which was hanging around the mine site. I'm sure somebody might be giving it some scraps of food. That's why it's acting more like a dog, but it was definitely a fox. That was it in terms of wildlife. The roads there are well maintained. It's very dusty. It's sand heaven as far as the eye can see. And then you make your way, so I said Salta, 40-minute flight to Arizaro. And then from there, it's about another 30-minute drive into the mountains until you get to the Lindero mine site, which is quite higher up. It's around 3,700 meters above sea level. So you can really feel it physiologically. Seems as if your brain ticks over at just a slightly slower clock speed than you're used to. And as soon as you start talking with your friends or colleagues, or, when you're out and about viewing the sites, you quickly get out of breath and you have to catch your breath quite regularly. One interesting thing also, basically at the end of the first day, we had 1 or 2 of our group members during the day who didn't really feel that well. They didn't adapt quite well to the high altitude, and they were given oxygen masks to assist them. And myself also, by the end of the first day, laying down in the camp there for the night, I had to put on this oxygen mask for myself for about 10, 15 minutes just to recuperate a little bit, get rid of that aching headache. That's your first symptom of oxygen deprivation.
That is wild. Was there an airport? Like when you say you landed in the Lithium Triangle, I mean, was there a runway? Are you landing on dirt? How did you land?
I think it's more or less on salt. So you fly over the mountains, spectacular scenery all the way there. And then you do see this great flat lying expanse opening up, and it's white in the sunshine because it's salt being reflected back up. And so there's an airstrip there, and you basically go down there, and some of the local mine stuff was waiting for us and whisked us away to the mine. Really a smooth operation, seamless. It's worth mentioning when you go there by car or truck, it's about up to 12 hours driving. And what I understand, it's about 2/3 of the way paved highway or just road. And then it degenerates into a twisty, turning mountain gravel road into the Andes. So 12 hours versus 40 minutes, that gives you a bit of a contrast of the terrain you're dealing with.
I mean, it makes you wonder how on earth they found this thing. So, I
Yeah.
mean, interestingly, this isn't a lithium mine. This is a gold mine, the Lindero mine. So do you know how they found it? Or tell us a little bit about the mine and, your experience entering the mine and just what's going on there.
Yeah, so the discovery portion there is very interesting. I spoke with one of the co-discoverers, Jorge Kesting, who is the exploration manager there for Fortuna Mining's subsidiary, Mansfield Minera. And so he's the exploration manager there right now. He said back in 2000, he was backpacking around the Andes there, living out of a tent for weeks on end. And they found a little bit of outcrop actually at the deposit that's next to Lindero. It's actually called Arizaro, and it's slated for it's probably the next development of the Lindero mine. But yeah, so they were kicking rocks there for weeks on end in really harsh conditions, and they were about to give up until they basically on the last days on the way back, they discovered these interesting looking rocks, and they dug a little bit more and found a little bit more. And it turned out that they made a discovery there. 20 years later, it was kind of poignant to watch Mr. Kisting holding a doré bar after Fortuna poured a doré bar there, obviously to show off to the tour group as well. But to go full circle from the initial discovery to holding the doré bar poured from this discovery, you could just tell his whole being was being very satisfied there. I can't imagine that there's a more satisfying feeling than going full circle in that sense.
Indeed, from stumbling across an outcrop to a bar of gold in your hands, especially with gold prices being what they are, must be gratifying. Interesting. So now Jorge Ganoza is the president and CEO. We've had him on the show before, a very interesting individual. Was he there?
He didn't make it himself down to Argentina, but I did catch up with him telephonically just after the site visit to get the context on the corporate side of the company itself. And so he did make a very poignant observation that even though Lindero is the company's flagship asset in South America, it anchors their South American operations, it's not their flagship asset. Obviously, they have the new mine. It's been operating for about a year now, Seguela in the Ivory Coast, which is slated for significant gold production. And so the company is definitely looking to shape itself into a mid-tier gold producer or gold equivalent producer, according to Ganoza. So that's all very good. We saw them focus that strategy a little bit more in the past week. Just following the site visit, the company announced the divestiture of two non-core assets, Yarimoko in Burkina Faso and San Jose in Mexico. Both of these assets, I am led to believe, were nearing the end of their reserve life. There might be some more economical ore left at both these operations, but perhaps more suited for a smaller operator with a more specific sense for those sensitive ounces, if you could say that. Whereas Ganoza was telling me that today the company is more focused on getting that tier one strategy for itself, honing that. And he wants to see assets in Fortuna's portfolio that churns out about 500,000 ounces at mid-curve costs of the industry on average. And at least he wants to see at least a decade of reserves in the mine plan. Now, importantly, he did point out that Lindero fits this bill. It's got at least 10 years in the mine plan up to about 2034 as it stands right now. And then there is the massive promise of developing the Arizaro deposit, which is about 2 kilometers to the east of Lindero, and which was in fact the site of the initial discovery. I'm told that unfortunately there the gold grades are a little bit lower than at Lindero, but there's more copper. And so it will make for a nice bulk tonnage operation there, essentially removing the mountain and stacking all the ore onto a giant heap leach pad, creating a new mountain next door and extracting all the metal from that.
Okay, excellent. So, as far as the Lindero mine, then, your experience, like, was it underground or was it in a mountain? Like, what was your experience of the mine? Tell us about the actual mine tour.
So, as soon as we arrived at the mine site, the usuals take place. You get your orientation briefing, you get a medical check, and you get your safety briefing. And then, of course, you get handed some safety equipment, personal protective gear, your mandatory hard hat and steel capped toes, boots. The site itself is fairly compact, but there are various elevations since it is right in the heart of mountains. So from the camp, you drive up several hundred meters to the open pit, which I'm told was once also a mountain peak, and it's to date been removed, and it looks like a small open pit has started to take shape there. If you didn't know there was a mountain before, you would have thought they just started mining there. But they have been going for a good 5 years now already. So we saw a blast take place on the open pit. I'm told that the Lindero open pit is busy with the phase 3 pushback, which means it's a porphyry intrusion. And so they have to cut back in the barren core of the pit to reach those mineralized areas surrounding on the periphery of the core. And so it's quite a spectacular operation to view. Then the ore gets loaded into haul trucks down to a 3-stage crushing circuit. I'm told the ideal leach size for the material is between 6 to 8 millimeters. Then it gets put through an agglomeration process that adds a little bit of like a thickener, like cement, but also making sure that the material is still porous so that the cyanide leach solution can pass through before it is then stacked onto a heap leach pad. And just last month, the company completed construction of the second phase of their heap leach pad, which will give them capacity to stack up to 80 million tons of mineralized material. And so this will be enough to see them through for the next 10 years. So we also then got taken around to see various angles of the heap leach pad, and then at the end taken down to the sort and the downstream processing where they remove the pregnant heap leach solution and treat it through the various stages and through the filter presses to remove the carbon. And eventually you are left with some fines, which you put through the smelter, and the end result is a pouring of a doré bar, which happens about twice a week, probably delivers anywhere between 1 to 2 bars of around 1 kilogram each.
Thank you for the very detailed journey, in a sense, from this open pit to, the finished product. So in terms of what's nearby, like, where do they get supplies? Like, are there communities nearby, or is this so remote that there's nothing really even close and you just have to basically fly in all your supplies? Is there a lodging? Do they drive in? How does personnel and, say, supplies work into this whole project?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, there is a road and there is some infrastructure as well as the airstrip in the Salar. The airstrip does get used by several other mining companies in the area as well. Salta itself is an emerging mining district. It did not have mining previously, but with the various lithium waves and cycles that we've now seen over the past 10, 15 years, the Salar de Arizaro has seen, I'm told, up to 12 developments spring up on its edges. 3 of them, I'm told, are producing now, lithium producers, and another 3 are about to start up. And then there's still the balance in construction, various stages there. So there certainly is a lot of increased competition these days for mining talent and equipment. Everything else needs to get trucked in on the long road there. But from a logistical standpoint, I'm told that aside from the long drive, there's really no specific challenges that prohibits anything. Anything can and does get through there. Stolta itself is also very supportive of the industry, and I'm told that the local government has taken a keen interest in trying to support and develop legal frameworks that really encourage foreign investment and to nurture new talent into the mining industry, all areas there of the services industry and geology, mining, engineering, all those kind of things. So at this stage, they do host a lot of expats from South America to staff the mines and to bring the technical expertise required.
Okay, super interesting. And that's where I wanted to go next. The whole political situation, we have Javier Milei. Sounds like it's been going not too badly to a certain degree, but I mean, did it come up at all, say, with locals or with the mining company, like even just being in the country and spending some time there? What is your sense of where things stand, say, in Argentina, and maybe more specifically for the mining industry, but even more general, like where do things stand there politically?
So from the mining executives I've been talking with, they are very optimistic about what Javier Milei has achieved over the past 12 months. He took power, I think, in December 2023. And so they tell me that he has made life simpler, even at Lindero. 1 year into the presidency, the Libertarian is really strong on conservative measures, cost cutting, austerity measures are the name of the game. So much so that the tour attendees witnessed a national strike take place in Argentina against Milei. People were protesting these cuts and saying that it goes too far and that they are now feeling a little bit estranged from what he wants. So I am told this is now from locals, so I can't really vouch for the factual accuracy of it, but the feeling is what I've been told from several sources is that the unions in Argentina have had a long hold on industry in Argentina due to the fluctuations in severe inflation. Inflation, when Milei took power, was at about 26% monthly. And so in the past, it's been higher. It's even been into the hundreds. And so within 12 months, Milei has brought it down to the range of around 2 to 3%. And this has now caused upset amongst some of the unions, specifically because in the past they were able to get their employers to the negotiating table every 3 months for salary increases to keep up with inflation. But now that inflation has dropped to normal levels, it feels like the unions are angry that they've now lost a significant bargaining chip on their table. So that's the feeling I get from the locals. How much truth is in that, we'll have to decide. But it certainly seems like there's a lot of merit there. While one portion of business people love what Milei has done, he's a libertarian, of course. The population, it seems to me, are standing a little bit like a deer in headlights at this point. I'm feeling a lot of similarities to what I'm perceiving is happening to some of the people in America as well, for instance, with the Trump administration taking things really to the maximal level of things, So I think there's a little bit of that kind of backlash happening there in Argentina as well. But for the most part, the economic indicators are looking good.
And so overall, one could assume from what you're saying, not a bad place to do business from a mining perspective, as long as your workforce is willing to cooperate to a certain degree.
I think the most jarring aspect of doing business in Argentina as a foreign company is getting your capital out. There are some very strict capital controls remaining in place from former regimes, which Milei has undertaken to remove, but has not yet. And so, for instance, on the ground in Argentina, you have an official exchange rate, and then you get the normal exchange rate, which there's quite a bit of spread between the two. And so the company tells me that managing their peso supply is quite a tricky situation. They hedge their losses with some other financial instruments because they're forced to bring back any capital that they might get from revenues from selling gold internationally back to Argentina currency. And then they have to use it there. So it's still at this point a little bit of a tricky situation getting capital out. So They have to date instead invested heavily in developing Lindero, building out the phase 2 heap leach pad, phase 3 of the open pit. And now this year, they actually have no real significant capital outlays in Argentina. So they are saving up some currency. And I think this is where we can speculate openly that they might be in a good position to acquire a earlier stage asset, perhaps even a development stage asset. But I'm told they would want to see a clear path to how they can add value and move the asset into the next phase if they were to pull the trigger on any such acquisition.
Right. So business is going well enough that they're happy to consider at least doing more in the country, which is interesting. And as far as China is concerned, I mean, when Milei came in, he kind of, left BRICS before they really entered. And there was a sense of almost, let's call it anti-communist party sentiment. Was there any discussion around China while you were there? Were you able to kind of take the temperature on the feeling there? Had things warmed up a bit? What was your sense of the China question, so to speak?
That's a great question, Adrian. I'm afraid I don't have an answer for you. That really didn't come up in our discussions. The discussion would most likely have centered around increased protectionism, trade protectionism globally, of course, spurred by the Trump administration in the US's actions. For the most part, the conversation was about opening up trade with global partners again. And in that sense, China was named as a preferred partner. The operation has been scrambling for spare parts for their fleet of trucks, for instance. But that comes back to capital controls and, the trade controls in the country. So, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of words to actually just tell you. I really don't have a succinct answer for you on the China question.
Sure, but the fact that it didn't come up at all, in a sense, is an answer unto itself, or that it didn't come up that much. And as far as tariffs that you mentioned, did tariffs come up at all? Is it causing any problems, say, for an operation in Argentina?
Right. Yeah. So this was one of their key points to share, in fact, is that they are changing out their operating fleet of like 90-ton Komatsu haul trucks to more nimble China-built Scania trucks, a few more of them, due to a greater access to spare parts, to labor that can actually operate on the machines, and to cost efficiency. Just a more nimble vehicle uses less fuel and more easily navigate the steep gradients and terrain of the open pit to the crusher conveyors, etc. So that's one element of illustrating how they are being fleet-footed, if you will, financially speaking, trying to adapt to the economic realities around them. So the fleet exchange program is ongoing and will be completed by the end of the year. Another interesting project there that we saw is they're busy putting the final touches to a solar photovoltaic plant, which will shave about 40% of the site's diesel-generated electricity going forward, given that they have this abundance of sunlight there in the desert. So that was another important point for the site going forward. And I think it all speaks to them being able to access international markets, although there are some constraints connected to the trade restrictions and capital protections still in place.
Okay, excellent. So as we wrap up here, Henry, do you have any final sort of big picture thoughts or reflections after going and coming back, writing about it? What is the takeaway for you? What are some big picture thoughts that you have as we exit here?
Big picture, I would say Salta is emerging as a mining jurisdiction thanks to the boom in lithium mining there. And I'm sure it will bounce back again in a few years' time when the prices come back, given the strong fundamentals analysts foresee for lithium. Then, of course, there's the government response really strongly trying to enhance the regulatory supports for mining and also trying to establish a pipeline of talent to feed into the future mines that surely will be built there in the Andes. Being such a mountainous terrain, it lends itself to discovery. Lots of mineralization are yet to be found there. I'm told that much of the area has not really been prospected to any modern sense effectively. So there still is a lot of work to be done there. Lindero itself, it's got quite a good runway to exploration. I'm told the company will be hitting the Arizaro deposit next door with some drills this year. A substantial amount of money and meterage being planned there to try and see if they can improve the already inferred resource established there to something more measured or more formal. Then we're also eagerly waiting to see whether the company will be able to put all that cash it's building in country to good use, to maybe acquiring another asset that will pad the growth profile. I guess another important point that the CEO left me with was that the company has a strong pathway of organic growth ahead of it, where Lindero obviously is one of these pillars. And then they've got the Seguela mine, where there's an expansion underway. And then in Senegal, they are now also hitting an earlier stage gold project with prospecting. So there's quite a bit of excitement to look forward to from the company itself, other than being a stable producer with the goal of achieving that mid-tier status in the near future.
Henry Lazenby, Western editor at the Northern Miner, thank you for joining us and sharing the story of visiting the Lindero mine in Argentina.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much again.
Thank you once again to Razor Labs for sponsoring this week's episode of the Northern Miner Podcast. You can learn more if you go to razor-labs.com. And thank you also to Henry Lazenby for appearing on this week's episode. And thank you, dear listener, for continuing to support this program. If you want to help out the podcast, please leave us a review in the Apple Podcast directory, share it with your friends, and until next week, take care.